My family laughed when I got fired. Now they're begging me for a job. The laughter echoed through my parents' dining room like broken glass cutting through my chest. Sarah was wiping tears from her eyes. David was slapping his knee. And even my own mother was covering her mouth trying to suppress her giggles. They thought it was hilarious that I'd been fired from my marketing job at Henderson Associates after 3 years of what I thought was solid work. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jake, my younger brother, was the worst of all, recording it on his phone and saying he couldn't wait to post it on his story. Mia, the marketing genius, he snorted, couldn't even market herself into keeping a job. That was 6 months ago, and right now, as I'm sitting in my converted home office looking at a contract worth more than my entire annual salary used to be, I can still hear that laughter. But today, it sounds different. Today, it sounds like the last time they'll ever underestimate me. My name is Mia Chen, and I'm 28 years old. 6 months ago, I thought my world was ending. I'd been working at Henderson Associates, a mid-sized marketing firm in Austin, Texas, for 3 years. I wasn't climbing the corporate ladder as fast as I'd hoped, but I was comfortable. I had my own apartment, a decent car, and what I thought was job security. I specialized in social media campaigns and had helped several clients increase their online engagement significantly. My boss, Tom Richardson, seemed satisfied with my work, and my performance reviews were consistently good. Then came that Tuesday, morning in March when everything shifted. Tom called me into his office at 9 sharp, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes when I sat down across from his massive oak desk. The office smelled like coffee and his expensive cologne, the same scents I'd grown accustomed to during our weekly check-ins. "Mia," he started, shuffling papers unnecessarily. "I'm afraid we're going to have to let you go." The words hit me, like a physical blow. I actually felt my chest tighten as if someone had wrapped a band around my ribs and pulled tight. The company is restructuring, and we've decided to consolidate the social media department with our general marketing team. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "But my campaigns are performing well," I managed to say. "The Johnson account saw a 40% increase in engagement last quarter, and the Rodriguez campaign exceeded its targets." Tom nodded quickly, still avoiding eye contact. "Your work has been solid, Mia. This isn't about performance. It's about budget cuts and operational efficiency." He slid a manila envelope across the desk. "You'll find your severance package in there, 2 weeks' pay, plus your accumulated vacation time." 2 weeks, 3 years of my life, and they were giving me 2 weeks' pay to walk away. I felt a strange numbness creeping up from my toes, like my body was slowly shutting down. I took the envelope with hands that felt disconnected from my body and stood up on legs that seemed to belong to someone else. "I'm sorry, Mia," Tom said, finally looking at me. "You're talented. You'll land on your feet." I walked out of that office in a daze. My coworkers avoided eye contact as I packed my desk, shoving 3 years of accumulated personal items into a cardboard box that felt absurdly small for representing so much of my adult life. Marcus Williams, who worked in the cubicle next to mine, was the only one who approached me. "This is ridiculous," he whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "They're keeping Jennifer's nephew who started last month and letting you go. It's not about budget cuts, Mia. It's about nepotism." That information felt like salt in an open wound, but I appreciated Marcus being honest with me. Jennifer Hartley was the HR director, and I'd noticed her nephew Kevin getting assignments that should have been mine. I'd chalked it up to him being eager and new, but now the pieces were falling into place in a way that made my stomach turn. I drove home to my apartment on Riverside Drive in complete silence. No radio, no phone calls, just the sound of Austin, traffic, and my own breathing. My apartment felt different when I walked in that afternoon. The same furniture, the same photos on the walls, the same view of Lady Bird Lake from my small balcony. But everything felt temporary now, precarious. That evening, I called my parents to break the news. My mother answered on the third ring, her voice cheerful and warm. "Mia, sweetie, how are you?" "I got fired today," I said without preamble. Sometimes the direct approach is the only way to handle devastating news. There was a pause. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice immediately shifting to concern. "What happened?" I explained the situation as objectively as I could, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Mom made appropriate sympathetic sounds and assured me that everything would work out. Dad got on the line and offered to help me review my resume. They were supportive, as I expected them to be, and suggested I come to Sunday dinner that weekend to talk things through with the family. Sunday dinner at my parents' house had been a tradition for as long as I could remember. Their house in Dyea, Westlake, was a sprawling ranch-style home with a kitchen that always smelled like whatever elaborate meal Mom had spent the day preparing. The dining room had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto their meticulously maintained backyard, and the table could easily seat 8 people. I should have known what was coming when I walked in and saw Sarah and David's car in the driveway alongside Jake's pickup truck. Sarah, my older sister by 4 years, worked as a real estate agent and had been remarkably successful, especially considering she'd only been in the business for 2 years. David, her husband of 6 years, was a software engineer at a tech startup that had been growing rapidly. Jake, 25 and fresh out of college, had landed a job at a local bank and was still in that phase where he thought having a steady paycheck made him a financial expert. Dinner started normally enough. Mom had made her famous pot roast, and we caught up on the usual family gossip. Sarah was closing on $1 million property. David was working on some revolutionary app that was going to change everything, and Jake was being considered for a promotion already. Then Dad asked about my job search. "Well," I said, cutting into my roast, "I've been networking and updating my portfolio. I'm actually considering some freelance opportunities while I look for the right full-time position." That's when it started. Sarah let out a little laugh. "Freelance? Mia, you were barely hanging on to your regular job. Do you really think you can handle running your own business?" I felt my cheeks flush. I was good at my job, Sarah. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The firing wasn't about performance. "If you were that good," David chimed in, "they would have found a way to keep you. Companies don't let go of valuable employees, even during budget cuts." Jake, who had been scrolling through his phone, looked up with a grin. "Maybe you should consider retail, Mia. I mean, if marketing didn't work out, maybe it's time to try something more realistic." That's when the laughter started. Sarah giggled at Jake's comment, which encouraged him to continue. "I'm serious. My friend Tyler manages a clothing store at the mall. I bet he could get you a job folding shirts." David joined in with his own suggestion about how I could always become a barista, since I seemed to have plenty of free time to perfect my coffee-making skills. Even my parents were smiling, though they tried to hide it behind their napkins. The worst part wasn't the jokes themselves. It was the underlying assumption behind them, the casual dismissal of 3 years of professional experience, the implication that I'd somehow failed in a way that made me unsuitable for anything beyond entry-level service work. These were the people who were supposed to believe in me, support me, help me through a difficult time. Sarah, between fits of laughter, managed to say, "I'm sorry, but come on, Mia. You've always been a little naive about business. Remember when you wanted to start that jewelry-making thing in college? Or the time you thought you could become a food blogger?" Those had been dreams, tentative explorations of possibilities, not serious business ventures. But the way she said it made them sound like delusional fantasies. evidence of a pattern of unrealistic expectations and poor judgment. Jake pulled out his phone and started recording. "This is going to be great content," he said, pointing the camera at me. "Mia, the marketing expert who couldn't market herself into keeping a job. Maybe you can use this for your freelance portfolio." I sat there, feeling smaller and smaller as their laughter filled the dining room. The pot roast turned to ash in my mouth, and the walls seemed to be closing in around me. These people who shared my DNA, who had known me my entire life, who had celebrated my graduation and my first job offer, were now treating my professional setback like entertainment. "You know what?" I said, standing up abruptly. "I think I should go." Mom immediately looked concerned. "Mia, honey, we're just teasing. Don't take it so seriously." "We're family," Sarah added. "We can joke around with each other." But as I looked around that table, at their flushed faces and self-satisfied smiles, I realized something important. This wasn't teasing. This was them feeling superior, feeling secure in their own success by diminishing mine. This was them deciding that my dreams and ambitions were something to laugh at, rather than something to support. I gathered my purse and jacket while they continued making half-hearted attempts to get me to stay. Jake was still holding his phone, and I knew that somewhere in his social media accounts, there would be videos of his sister being mocked for losing her job. The thought made my stomach turn. As I drove home that night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to prove them wrong by finding another job and quietly rebuilding my life. I was going to prove them wrong by succeeding, so dramatically, so undeniably, that they would never question my abilities again. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt since being fired. I made coffee, sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop, and started making lists. Not job applications or resume updates, but business plans and client acquisition strategies. If Henderson Associates thought they could function without me, and if my family thought I was unemployable, then I would show them all exactly what they'd lost. Marcus had mentioned that several of Henderson's clients had been asking about me since my departure. That seemed like the perfect place to start. I spent the morning researching those clients, understanding their current challenges, and developing proposals for how I could help them as an independent consultant. By noon, I had drafted 3 different service packages and created a basic business plan for Mia Chen Marketing Solutions. The name wasn't creative, but it was professional and clear. I wasn't trying to be cute or clever. I was trying to be taken seriously. The first call I made was to Rodriguez Manufacturing, one of the accounts I'd managed at Henderson. The campaign I'd run for them had exceeded their expectations by 30%, and Marcus had mentioned that they weren't happy with the transition to their new account manager. "Ms. Rodriguez," I said when I got the owner's daughter and marketing director on the phone, "this is Mia Chen. I used to manage your account at Henderson Associates." "Mia!" Elena Rodriguez's voice immediately brightened. "We've been wondering. What happened to you? Kevin, the new guy, is... well, he's not you." That conversation lasted 45 minutes and ended with Elena asking me to put together a proposal for taking over their marketing completely. They were willing to pay 50% more than what Henderson had been charging them because they valued the personal attention and expertise I could provide. The second call was to Johnson Tech Solutions. The third was to a small restaurant chain that had been considering hiring Henderson, but had been put off by their high prices and impersonal approach. By the end of the week, I had 3 clients, and enough work to keep me busy for the next 2 months. But I wasn't satisfied with just replacing my old salary. I wanted to build something bigger, something that would make my family's laughter echo in their own ears like a cruel joke. I wanted to create success so obvious and undeniable that they would have to acknowledge it. I spent the next month working 18-hour days. I optimized Rodriguez Manufacturing's social media presence, redesigned Johnson Tech's entire digital marketing strategy, and created a brand awareness campaign for the restaurant chain that, increased their foot traffic by 60% in 3 weeks. More importantly, I was documenting everything. Every success, every client testimonial, every metric that showed improvement. I was building a portfolio that would speak for itself when the time came. The breakthrough came in month 2 when Elena Rodriguez recommended me to her business network. Austin has a surprisingly tight-knit business community, and word travels fast when someone is producing results. I started getting calls from companies I'd never heard of, entrepreneurs who needed marketing expertise but couldn't afford big agencies, established businesses that wanted more personal attention than they were getting from their current providers. By month 3, I was turning down work. I had to make a choice, either limit my client base or start building a team. The smart business decision was obvious, but it also meant taking a risk that my family's laughter had made feel impossible. Just a few months earlier, I decided to take the risk. Marcus had been increasingly frustrated at Henderson, especially after they'd promoted Kevin to senior account manager despite his obvious incompetence. When I offered him a position as my first employee, he didn't hesitate. He gave his 2 weeks' notice the next day. "You know they're going to be furious," he told me over coffee as we discussed his transition. "Tom is already defensive about losing clients to you. When he finds out I'm joining you, he's going to lose it." I sipped my latte and looked out the window of the coffee shop where we were meeting. Let him be furious. His company lost me. Lost you and is losing clients because he values politics over performance. That's his problem, not mine. Within 6 weeks of Marcus joining me, we had landed 2 major accounts that Henderson had been pursuing for months. One was a tech startup that needed a complete digital presence built from scratch. The other was an established law firm that wanted to modernize their marketing approach without losing their professional image. The tech startup project was particularly satisfying because it required exactly the kind of innovative thinking that Henderson had never appreciated. The founders, a couple in their 30s who had developed a revolutionary app for small business inventory management, needed marketing that could explain complex technical concepts to non-technical business owners. I spent a week shadowing them, learning their product inside and out, understanding their customer base, and identifying the pain points their app solved. Then I created a marketing campaign that told stories instead of listing features, that showed business owners seeing success rather than describing software capabilities. The campaign launched in month 4 of my business, and within 2 weeks, the startup had more qualified leads than they'd had in the previous 6 months combined. They were so impressed that they recommended me to their investors, which led to 3 more tech clients and established me as someone who could handle complex B2B marketing challenges. But the real validation came when Jennifer Hartley, the HR director at Henderson whose nephew had taken my job, reached out to me directly. "Mia," she said when I answered her call, "I hope there are no hard feelings about how things ended at Henderson. I was wondering if you might be available for some freelance work. We're struggling with a few accounts, and Tom thought you might be able to help us out." The irony was so thick I could taste it. They'd fired me to save money and make room for nepotism, and now they wanted to hire me back as a consultant for probably twice what they'd been paying me as an employee. "I appreciate you thinking of me, Jennifer," I said, "but I'm fully booked for the next 6 months. You might want to check with some of the larger agencies in town." It wasn't entirely true. I could have made room for Henderson if I'd wanted to, but I didn't want to. I wanted them to struggle with the decision they'd made. I wanted them to face the consequences of prioritizing politics over performance. By month 5, Mia Chen Marketing Solutions was generating more revenue than I'd made in my best year at Henderson. Marcus and I had moved out of my apartment's converted home office and into a real office space in downtown Austin. We'd hired 2 more employees, a graphic designer named Sam who specialized in brand identity, and a content writer named Alex who could make even the most boring B2B company sound interesting. The office wasn't fancy, but it was ours. We had a conference room with a view of the Austin skyline, a kitchen area where we could make coffee and have lunch meetings, and enough space for everyone to work without feeling cramped. More importantly, we had clients who trusted us, employees who felt valued, and a growing reputation for delivering results. I was working late one Friday evening, putting the finishing touches on a presentation for a potential client, when my phone buzzed with a text message from Jake. "Hey, heard through the grapevine that you're doing some consulting work. Good for you. Maybe we can talk business sometime. The bank is looking for marketing help." I stared at the message for a long time. 6 months ago, Jake had been recording my humiliation for social media content. Now he was casually reaching out like we were professional colleagues, like his family hadn't spent an entire dinner making jokes about my unemployability. I didn't respond to the text that night. Instead, I finished my presentation, locked up the office, and drove home to my new apartment. I'd moved to a bigger place in a better neighborhood, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of downtown Austin. It was twice the size of my old apartment and cost 3 times as much, but I could afford it now. As I sat on my balcony that night, looking out at the city lights and thinking about how much my life had changed, I realized something important. The laughter from that Sunday dinner 6 months ago had stopped echoing in my head. It had been replaced by something else, the sound of my own voice confidently presenting to clients, the sound of my employees collaborating on projects, the sound of success being built one satisfied customer at a time. But I also knew that the real test was still coming. Eventually, my family was going to realize that their jokes had aged poorly, that their assumptions about my abilities had been completely wrong. And when that realization hit them, they were going to want something from me. I just hadn't expected it to happen so soon. The call that changed everything came on a Wednesday morning at exactly 9:37. I know the precise time because I was staring at the clock on my computer screen when my phone rang, trying to decide whether to grab another coffee before my 10 o'clock client presentation. The caller ID showed Sarah's name, which was unusual. We hadn't spoken since that disastrous Sunday dinner 7 months ago, and she wasn't exactly the type to call just to chat. Mia? Her voice sounded strained, lacking the confidence I was used to hearing from my older sister. "Do you have a minute to talk?" I leaned back in my office chair, looking out the window at downtown Austin. The skyline had become familiar. To me now, a daily reminder of how far I'd come since that humiliating dinner. "I've got a few minutes before my next meeting. What's going on?" There was a pause long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Sarah cleared her throat. "I need to ask you something, and I know this might be awkward given everything." The everything she was referring to hung between us like smoke from a fire neither of us wanted to acknowledge. I waited, letting the silence stretch until she was forced to continue. "The real estate market has shifted," she said finally. "I know you probably haven't been following it, but things have gotten really competitive. Commission rates are down, inventory is limited, and there are twice as many agents fighting for half as many listings." I had been following the real estate market, actually. One of my clients was a mortgage broker who specialized in helping first-time home buyers, and understanding market trends was essential for creating effective marketing campaigns. But I didn't interrupt Sarah to share that information. "I've been thinking about diversifying my income streams," she continued, her voice getting steadier as she settled into what sounded like a rehearsed pitch. "And I remembered that you're doing some kind of consulting work now. Marketing stuff, right? Some kind of consulting work." The casual dismissal in her tone made my jaw clench. 7 months ago, this same woman had laughed until she cried at the idea of me freelancing. Now she was calling it consulting work like it was a hobby I'd picked up. "I run a marketing agency," I said evenly. "Mia Chen Marketing Solutions. We specialize in digital marketing strategy, brand development, and customer acquisition for small to medium-sized businesses." "Right, exactly. That's what I need help with. I've been trying to build my online presence, but it's not really working. My Instagram barely gets any engagement. My Facebook posts get maybe 2 or 3 likes, and I haven't gotten a single lead from social media in months. David keeps telling me I need to invest in marketing, and I figured since you're family. Ah, since I'm family. The words carried an expectation that made my stomach turn. She wasn't calling because she believed in my abilities or because she'd researched my work and decided I was the best person for the job. She was calling because she thought being related to me meant she could get professional services at a family discount, or maybe even for free. "What kind of budget are you working with?" I asked, pulling up a blank document on my computer to take notes. Another pause. "Budget? Well, I was hoping we could work something out. You know, maybe I could refer clients to you in exchange for you helping me get my marketing sorted out." I almost laughed. Not the cruel laughter that had echoed through my parents' dining room, but the kind of disbelieving laughter that escapes when someone's audacity catches you completely off guard. Sarah wanted me to provide professional marketing services for free in exchange for the possibility that she might recommend me to other people. It was exactly the kind of arrangement that successful businesses avoid because it devalues expertise and creates unrealistic expectations. "Sarah," I said carefully, "my agency charges a minimum of $5,000 for comprehensive social media strategy development, and that's just for the initial package. Implementation and ongoing management start at $3,000 per month. Those are our standard rates for real estate professionals." The silence on her end was different this time. It wasn't the pause of someone gathering their thoughts. It was the silence of someone whose assumptions had just been demolished. $5,000? She repeated. "Mia," I thought. "I mean, we're family. I figured you'd want to help me out." "I do want to help you," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything that had happened, Sarah was still my sister. But I also run a business. I have employees, overhead costs, and professional obligations. I can't provide services for free any more than you can sell houses for free. "But it's just social media," she said, and I could hear the frustration creeping into her voice. "How hard can it be? I mean, people post pictures and write captions. It's not like you're performing surgery." People post pictures and write captions. The reductive way she described what I did for a living was exactly why I'd built my business in the first place. Everyone thought marketing was easy because everyone used social media. It was like saying surgery was easy because everyone used knives. "Sarah," I said, keeping my voice professional. "Effective social media marketing requires market research, competitor analysis, content strategy development, brand voice establishment, hashtag optimization, audience targeting, engagement, tracking, conversion funnel creation, and ongoing performance analysis. It's not just posting pictures." Okay, she said quickly. "I get it. You're the expert. But couldn't you make an exception just this once? I'm really struggling here, and I thought family helped family." Family helped family. The phrase that had been conspicuously absent 7 months ago when I'd needed support and encouragement instead of mockery and humiliation. The phrase that only seemed to apply when someone wanted something from me. "I tell you what," I said, opening my calendar. "I can offer you a free consultation, 1 hour where we discuss your current marketing challenges and I provide some general recommendations. If you decide you want to work with my agency after that, we can discuss pricing and payment plans." It wasn't a particularly generous offer, by family standards, but it was more than I offered most potential clients. Usually, discovery calls were part of the sales process, not free consulting sessions. "That would be great," Sarah said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "When can we meet?" We scheduled the consultation for the following Friday at 2 o'clock. After I hung up, I sat in my office for a few minutes, processing the conversation. 7 months ago, Sarah had been wiping away tears of laughter at the suggestion that I could handle freelance work. Now she was calling me for professional help with the exact skills she'd mocked. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it also wasn't particularly satisfying. I'd expected this moment to feel like vindication, like proof that I'd been right and they'd been wrong. Instead, it just felt complicated. Sarah was struggling, and despite everything that had happened between us, I didn't take pleasure in her difficulties. Marcus knocked on my office door around noon, interrupting my thoughts. "How'd the consultation call go with the law firm?" "They want to move forward with the full package," I said, grateful for the distraction. 6-month contract, possible extension if we hit their lead generation targets. "Nice," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "That's what, the 4th new client this month?" "5th, actually. And I just got an interesting call from my sister. She wants marketing help for her real estate business." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Your sister? The one who thought you should consider retail work?" I'd told Marcus about the Sunday dinner incident a few months earlier during one of our late-night strategy sessions. He'd been appropriately outraged on my behalf and had made several unflattering comments about family members who didn't support each other's ambitions. "That's the one. Apparently the real estate market has gotten competitive, and she needs help with her online presence. Are you going to take her on as a client?" It was a good question, and one I'd been asking myself since hanging up the phone. From a business perspective, Sarah would be a relatively small client. Real estate agents typically had limited marketing budgets compared to the tech startups and established businesses that made up most of our client base. From a personal perspective, the situation was loaded with potential complications. "I'm going to do a consultation first," I said. "See what she needs and whether we're a good fit for each other." Marcus nodded. "Just remember, family clients can be the most difficult ones. They expect special treatment. They question your expertise because they remember when you were 12, and they assume they deserve discounts because of your relationship." He was right, of course. I'd heard horror stories from other business owners about working with family members, but I also knew that turning Sarah away without even hearing her out would make me look petty and unprofessional. Besides, if she was genuinely struggling, maybe I could help her succeed without compromising my own business standards. The rest of the week passed quickly. I had presentations to prepare, campaigns to review, and new employee interviews to conduct. We were growing fast enough that I was considering hiring another account manager, and I wanted to be selective about who we brought onto the team. Friday afternoon arrived faster than I'd expected. Sarah showed up at my office 10 minutes early, which surprised me. She was usually the type to run fashionably late to everything. She'd dressed professionally in a navy blazer and black slacks, carrying a leather portfolio that looked expensive but barely used. "Wow," she said, looking around the reception area. "This is really nice, Mia. Very professional." The office space wasn't extravagant, but it was well designed and clearly established. We had our company logo on the wall, client testimonials displayed prominently, and awards from local business organizations prominently featured. It looked like what it was, a successful, growing agency. I led her to our conference room, which had a view of downtown Austin and a large table where we could spread out materials. I'd prepared a standard consultation packet with information about our services, case studies from similar clients, and a worksheet for identifying marketing goals and challenges. "Can I get you coffee or water?" I asked, settling into my chair at the head of the table. "Coffee would be great," she said, then added, "I can't believe how official this all feels. I mean, I knew you were doing consulting work, but I didn't realize you had an actual office and employees and everything." Consulting work. There it was again, the subtle diminishment of what I'd built. I poured coffee from the carafe we kept in the conference room and handed her a mug with our company logo on it. "We have 4 full-time employees now," I said. "Marcus, who you might remember from when I worked at Henderson, plus Sam, our graphic designer, and Alex, our content writer. We're actually interviewing for a 5th position next week." Sarah nodded, but I could see her processing this information, recalibrating her expectations. She'd come in thinking she was asking her little sister for a favor. Now she was realizing she was sitting in a legitimate business asking for professional services. "So," I said, opening her file, "tell me about your current marketing challenges." For the next hour, Sarah laid out her situation with brutal honesty. Her real estate business, which had been thriving 2 years earlier, was struggling to adapt to a changed market. New agents were flooding the industry, established agents were cutting their commissions to stay competitive, and online lead generation had become essential for survival. "I know I need to be on social media," she said, pulling out her phone to show me her Instagram account. "But I just don't understand how to make it work. I post pictures of houses, I write captions about the features, but nobody engages with any of it." I scrolled through her recent posts, and the problems were immediately obvious. Every single post was a property listing with a caption that read like a real estate brochure. There was no personality, no storytelling, no reason for anyone to follow her account unless they were actively looking for a house in that exact moment. "The issue," I said gently, "is that you're treating social media like advertising space instead of relationship-building space. People don't follow real estate agents because they want to see houses for sale. They follow them because they want to feel connected to someone who can help them when they're ready to buy or sell." "What do you mean?" I pulled up the Instagram account of one of my real estate clients, a woman in Houston who had tripled her business in 18 months using the strategy we'd developed for her. "Look at this post," I said, showing Sarah a photo of the agent sitting in a coffee shop with her laptop. She's sharing her daily routine, talking about how she prepares for client meetings, giving people a behind-the-scenes look at what being a real estate agent actually involves. It got 400 likes and 60 comments from potential clients who felt like they knew her personally. Sarah studied the post carefully. "But how does that sell houses?" "It doesn't sell houses directly. It builds trust and relationships with people who might need a real estate agent eventually. When someone in her network decides to buy or sell, they already feel connected to her. They don't need to research agents because they feel like they already know one." We spent the rest of the consultation going through her current online presence, identifying missed opportunities, and discussing strategies for building authentic connections with potential clients. I explained the difference between content marketing and advertising, the importance of consistent branding across platforms, and the value of engagement over follower count. By the end of the hour, Sarah's portfolio was full of notes, and she looked simultaneously overwhelmed and excited. "This is exactly what I needed," she said. "I had no idea marketing was so strategic. I thought it was just about posting pretty pictures and hoping people would notice." "Most people think that," I said. "It's why effective marketing feels like magic when it works. People see the results, but not the strategy behind them." Sarah closed her portfolio and looked directly at me for the first time during our meeting. "Mia, I owe you an apology. The way we treated you at dinner that night, it was terrible. I didn't understand what you were building, and I made assumptions about your abilities that were completely wrong." The apology caught me off guard. I'd expected her to ask about pricing or timeline, not to acknowledge the elephant in the room that we'd been carefully avoiding for the past hour. "I appreciate that," I said. "I want to hire you," she continued. "Whatever your rates are, I'll find a way to make it work. I need this kind of expertise, and I clearly can't figure it out on my own." I pulled out our standard real estate marketing package, which included social media strategy, content calendar development, and ongoing management for 6 months. The total cost was $8,000, payable in monthly installments. Sarah's eyes widened when she saw the number, but she didn't argue or ask for a family discount. She just nodded and said, "When can we start?" "I'll need a signed contract and the first payment to get you on our schedule," I said. "We're booking new clients about 3 weeks out right now." "Perfect. I'll get you a check by Monday." As I walked her to the elevator, Sarah paused and turned back to me. "Can I ask you something? When we were laughing that night at dinner, did you know then that you were going to build all this?" I thought about her question as we waited for the elevator to arrive. Had I known? Not exactly. I'd known I was angry and determined to prove them wrong, but I hadn't had a specific vision of what success would look like. "I knew I wasn't going to let that be the end of my story," I said finally. I knew I had more to offer than anyone in that room gave me credit for. The elevator arrived and Sarah stepped inside. As the doors closed, she said, "I'm proud of you, Mia. I should have said that 7 months ago." After she left, I sat in my office for a while, thinking about how different that conversation had been from what I'd expected. I'd imagined this moment would feel like triumph, like vindication for all the humiliation I'd endured. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something new, a chance to rebuild a relationship that had been damaged by assumptions and misunderstandings. Marcus stopped by my office around 4 o'clock. "How'd it go with your sister?" "She's hiring us," I said. "Full package, no family discount requested." "Wow, that's got to feel good." It did feel good, but not in the way I'd expected. It felt like progress rather than revenge, like building bridges instead of burning them. My phone buzzed with a text message while Marcus and I were talking. It was from my mom. "Sarah told me about her meeting with you today. She's very impressed with what you've built. Maybe you could come to Sunday dinner this weekend? I'd love to hear about your business." I stared at the message for a long time. 7 months ago, Sunday dinner had been the scene of my humiliation. Now it was being offered as an opportunity to share my success. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I also recognized it as a genuine olive branch. I typed back, "I'll be there." Because sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated isn't revenge. Sometimes it's showing up with grace and letting your success speak for itself. The week between Sarah's consultation and Sunday dinner passed in a blur of client meetings, strategy sessions, and contract negotiations. We officially hired our 5th employee, a digital advertising specialist named Jordan, who had experience with real estate marketing. Sarah's contract was signed and her first payment processed, making her our newest client. But as Sunday approached, I found myself feeling nervous in a way I hadn't expected. This wasn't a business meeting or a client presentation. This was family, with all the complicated emotions and unresolved tensions that came with it. I spent Saturday evening preparing for dinner the way I prepared for important meetings. I chose my outfit carefully, professional but not intimidating. I organized talking points about my business, focusing on facts and achievements rather than personal victories. I practiced deflecting potential criticisms or jokes with grace and confidence. Most importantly, I reminded myself that I was going to this dinner as a successful business owner, not as the humiliated woman who had fled 7 months earlier. I had nothing to prove because I'd already proven it. I had nothing to defend because my success was undeniable. Sunday afternoon, I drove to my parents' house with the windows down and music playing, feeling more confident than I had in months. The house looked exactly the same, with Mom's flower garden blooming in the front yard and Dad's carefully maintained lawn stretching toward the street. But when I walked through the front door, everything felt different. The dining room that had been the scene of my humiliation now felt like just a room where my family gathered for meals. The table where I'd been mocked now looked like an opportunity to share my story on my own terms. Jake was already there, sitting on the couch, in the living room and scrolling through his phone. When he saw me, he stood up immediately. "Mia," he said, "I'm really glad you came." There was something different about his demeanor, a humility that hadn't been there 7 months earlier. He seemed younger somehow, less cocky and more uncertain. "Hi, Jake," I said, giving him a brief hug. "How are things at the bank?" His expression shifted, and I caught something that looked like disappointment or frustration crossing his face. "Things are, well, they're okay. Different than I expected, but okay." Before I could ask what he meant, Mom appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel and beaming at me. "Mia, sweetheart, I'm so happy you're here. Sarah told me all about your meeting and I have been dying to hear about your business." The genuine enthusiasm in her voice was a stark contrast to the polite concern she'd shown 7 months earlier. Then, she'd been trying to comfort me through what she assumed was a temporary setback. Now, she was excited to celebrate what she was beginning to understand was a genuine success story. Dad emerged from his home office, where he'd probably been watching the news or reading on his iPad. He was a man of few words, but when he hugged me, he held on a little longer than usual. "Proud of you, kiddo," he said quietly. "Always knew you had it in you." Sarah and David arrived shortly after, and the dynamic in the room immediately became more complex. Sarah seemed excited and slightly nervous, like someone who had recently realized they'd misjudged a situation. David was polite but distant, the way he always was when he wasn't sure how to read a social situation. Dinner itself was surprisingly normal. Mom had made her famous lasagna, and we caught up on family news and local gossip. But I could sense an undercurrent of curiosity about my business, questions that people wanted to ask but weren't sure how to bring up. Finally, over dessert, Dad cleared his throat and said, "Sarah tells us you've got quite an operation going, Mia. Maybe you could tell us a little about what you're doing." This was the moment I'd been preparing for, the opportunity to share my story without defensiveness or anger. I told them about leaving Henderson, about deciding to start my own agency, about the challenges of building a client base and hiring employees. I shared specific examples of successful campaigns, client testimonials, and revenue growth. But, more importantly, I talked about the satisfaction of building something from nothing, of solving complex problems for clients, of creating jobs for talented people who shared my vision for what marketing could accomplish. Jake listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about business development and client acquisition. David, who had been quiet for most of the evening, wanted to know about the technical aspects of digital marketing and how we measured return on investment. "What's your biggest challenge right now?" Mom asked. "Scaling," I said. "We're at the point where we have more demand than we can handle with our current team, but growing too fast could compromise the quality of our work. It's a good problem to have, but it's still a problem." "How many employees do you have now?" Dad asked. 5, including myself, but we're looking at adding 2 more positions in the next quarter if our current growth trajectory continues. The numbers seemed to surprise them. 7 months ago, they'd been suggesting I apply for retail jobs. Now I was talking about managing a team of 7 people and handling more business than I could accommodate. After dinner, Jake asked if he could talk to me privately. We stepped onto the back patio, where the early evening air was warm and still. "I need to apologize," he said without preamble. "The way I acted that night when you told us about losing your job, it was terrible. I thought I was being funny, but I was just being cruel." I appreciated the directness of his apology, but I was more interested in understanding what had prompted it. "What changed your mind?" Jake looked uncomfortable, shifting, his weight from one foot to the other. "Things at the bank haven't gone the way I expected. I thought having a business degree and a steady job meant I had everything figured out. But I'm basically just a glorified clerk, processing loan applications and following scripts. My supervisor treats me like I'm disposable, and I'm realizing that job security isn't the same thing as career satisfaction. Are you thinking about making a change?" "Maybe. I've been wondering if I could do what you did, start something on my own. But every time I think about it, I remember how we laughed at you for even considering freelance work, and I realize I don't have the courage you had." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Jake asking detailed questions about what it had been like to start my own business. He wanted to know about the financial challenges, the emotional difficulties, the practical steps I'd taken to transition from employee to entrepreneur. "The hardest part," I told him, wasn't the business side of things. It was believing in myself when the people closest to me didn't believe in me. It was trusting my own judgment when everyone else was telling me I was making a mistake. "Do you think I could do it?" he asked. I looked at my younger brother, seeing him clearly for the first time in years. Not as the cocky, recent graduate who thought he had all the answers, but as someone genuinely searching for direction and meaning in his professional life. "I think you could do anything you set your mind to," I said. "But you have to want it badly enough to work for it, even when it's difficult and uncertain." As we drove home that night, I reflected on how different the evening had been from what I'd expected. Instead of feeling vindicated or superior, I felt something more complicated. A mixture of satisfaction and responsibility. My family was beginning to understand what I'd accomplished, but they were also starting to see me as a resource, someone who had figured out something they were struggling with. The text messages started the next morning. First from Jake, asking if I had any recommendations for books about entrepreneurship. Then from David, wondering if I'd be interested in consulting on marketing strategy for his startup. Finally, from Mom, suggesting that I might want to speak at her book club about women in business. Each message represented a shift in how my family saw me, from the unemployed failure they'd mocked to the successful entrepreneur they now wanted to learn from. It was gratifying, but it was also a reminder that success brings its own set of challenges and expectations. I was sitting in my office on Tuesday morning, reviewing proposals for 2 new clients, when my assistant knocked on my door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "He doesn't have an appointment, but he says he's your brother." Jake was standing in our reception area, looking nervous and out of place in his bank uniform. He was holding a folder and shifting his weight, like someone who wasn't sure he belonged there. "Jake," I said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I quit my job this morning," he said, "and I was hoping you might have a few minutes to talk about what comes next." Jake stood in my reception area, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. His bank uniform was wrinkled, his tie was loosened, and he was clutching a manila folder like it contained either his salvation or his doom. I'd never seen my younger brother look so uncertain about anything in his entire life. "Let's go to my office," I said, leading him down the hallway past the open workspace where Marcus, Sam, and Alex were collaborating on a campaign for one of our tech clients. Jake's eyes took in everything: the modern furniture, the multiple monitors displaying analytics dashboards, the whiteboard covered with project timelines and creative concepts. "This is incredible, Mia," he said as we settled into my office. "I mean, I knew from Sunday dinner that you were doing well, but seeing it like this, it's really something." I poured him a glass of water from the pitcher I kept on my credenza and sat down across from him. "Tell me what happened this morning." Jake opened his folder and pulled out a piece of paper that I recognized as a resignation letter. The formal language looked strange in his handwriting, all corporate politeness masking what I suspected was frustration and disappointment. "I've been thinking about our conversation on Sunday," he said, "about how you said the hardest part was believing in yourself when other people didn't believe in you. And I realized that I've been staying at the bank, not because I believed in what I was doing, but because I was afraid of what people would think if I left." He explained that his job at the bank had become increasingly soul-crushing. What had started as a promising entry-level position with growth potential had devolved into mindless bureaucracy and arbitrary quotas. His supervisor, a woman in her 50s who'd been doing the same job for 20 years, seemed to take pleasure in shooting down any suggestions for improvement or innovation. "Last week, I proposed a new system for following up with loan applicants," Jake said. "Something that would improve our customer service and probably increase our approval rates." My supervisor told me that I was hired to process applications, not to think. She actually used those words, "not to think." The more he talked, the clearer it became that Jake's decision to quit wasn't impulsive. He'd been documenting problems at the bank for months, researching other career options, and slowly building up the courage to make a change. What had finally pushed him over the edge was a meeting where his supervisor had berated him in front of other employees for asking questions about a policy that didn't make sense. I sat there listening to her tell me that curiosity was not a valuable trait in banking, Jake said. And I thought about you walking out of Henderson when they didn't appreciate what you brought to the table. I thought about how you didn't just find another job, you created something better. And I decided that if I was going to be unhappy, I might as well be unhappy while building something instead of while destroying my soul for someone else's profit. It was the most mature thing I'd ever heard my brother say. The cocky recent graduate who'd recorded my humiliation for social media had been replaced by someone who was genuinely reflecting on his values and priorities. "What do you want to do now?" I asked. Jake pulled another document from his folder, this one covered with his handwriting and sticky notes. It was a business plan, rough and incomplete, but clearly the result of serious thought and research. "I want to start a financial consulting business," he said. "Not investment advice or wealth management, but practical financial planning for people in their 20s and 30s. Budgeting, debt reduction, credit improvement, first-time home buying guidance. The kind of stuff they don't teach in school, but everyone needs to know." He'd identified a genuine market opportunity. Most financial advisors focused on clients with significant assets to invest, leaving younger people with limited resources to figure things out on their own. Jake's idea was to create affordable, accessible financial guidance for people who were just starting to build their adult lives. "I've been researching the licensing requirements," he continued, "and I can get certified as a financial planning consultant with about 6 months of study and testing. The startup costs are relatively low since it's mostly a service business. But the thing I don't know anything about is marketing. How do I find clients? How do I build credibility when I'm just starting out? How do I compete with established firms that have been doing this for decades?" There it was, the real reason he'd come to see me. Jake needed marketing expertise, and he'd realized that his sister, who'd been mocked for losing her job, was now the most successful marketer he knew personally. "You want to hire my agency?" I said. "I want to hire you," he corrected. "Not as my sister, but as the person who built all this. I know I can't afford your full rates right now, but I was hoping we could work out some kind of arrangement. Maybe I could pay you a percentage of my revenue for the first year, or provide financial planning services to your employees in exchange for marketing help." It was a thoughtful proposal, the kind of creative partnership arrangement that demonstrated he'd been thinking seriously about the business side of his idea, but it also put me in a complicated position. Working with family members was always risky, and Jake's request came with additional emotional baggage from our history. I thought about Marcus's warning about family clients expecting special treatment and questioning expertise. I thought about the laughter in my parents' dining room and Jake's phone recording my humiliation. I also thought about the genuine remorse he'd shown and the courage it had taken for him to quit his job and walk into my office with a business plan. "Let me ask you something," I said. "Why should I take you seriously as a business partner, when 8 months ago you thought I should consider retail work?" Jake winced, but he didn't deflect or make excuses. "Because 8 months ago, I was an arrogant kid who thought having a college degree and a steady paycheck made me smarter than I actually was. I thought success was about following a predetermined path instead of creating your own. I was wrong about you, wrong about myself, and wrong about what it takes to build something meaningful. And what makes you think you can succeed in financial consulting when you've never run a business before? Because I understand money and I'm good at explaining complex concepts in simple terms. Because I've seen how the traditional financial industry treats young people, and I know I can do better. And because I've watched you prove that being underestimated can be an advantage if you're willing to work harder than everyone expects." His answers were honest and thoughtful, but I wasn't ready to commit to anything yet. "I need to think about this, Jake. Working with family is complicated, and I have responsibilities to my other clients and employees. I understand, he said, standing up and gathering his papers. I know this is a lot to ask, and I know I haven't exactly earned the right to ask for favors. But I also know that you're the best at what you do, and if I'm going to succeed, I need the best. After he left, I sat in my office staring out at the Austin skyline and thinking about the strange turn my life had taken. 8 months ago, my family had laughed at the idea of me freelancing. Now, my sister was a paying client, and my brother was asking for a business partnership. The reversal was so complete it felt almost surreal. Marcus knocked on my door around 3 o'clock. I saw your brother leaving earlier. Everything okay? I filled him in on Jake's visit and his proposal for financial consulting business. Marcus listened thoughtfully, asking questions about Jake's qualifications and market research. What's your gut feeling about it? He asked when I finished explaining the situation. Honestly, I think his business idea has potential. There's definitely a market for affordable financial planning services, and Jake has the background knowledge to provide real value. My concern is whether he has the discipline and persistence to build a business from scratch. And the personal side of it? That's more complicated. Part of me wants to help him because he's family, and because he's genuinely apologetic about how he treated me. But another part of me is worried about setting a precedent where my family expects me to solve their career problems. Marcus nodded. What if you treated it like any other potential partnership? Do your due diligence, evaluate the business plan, assess the market opportunity. If it makes sense financially and strategically, move forward. If it doesn't, decline, professionally. It was good advice, the kind of objective perspective I needed to separate family emotions from business decisions. I spent the rest of the afternoon researching the financial planning industry, analyzing Jake's business concept, and thinking about how a partnership might work. That evening, I called Jake and asked him to put together a formal presentation for the following week. I want to see a complete business plan, market analysis, competitive research, and financial projections. Treat this like you're pitching to an investor, because that's essentially what you're doing. Really? His voice was a mixture of excitement and nervousness. You're seriously considering it? I'm seriously considering evaluating it. There's a difference. If you want me to take your business idea seriously, you need to present it seriously. Jake spent the next week putting together what turned out to be an impressively thorough presentation. He'd researched licensing requirements, identified target demographics, analyzed competitor pricing strategies, and developed a marketing timeline that showed he understood the challenges of building a client base from scratch. The presentation itself was scheduled for the following Friday in our conference room. Jake arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a suit I'd never seen before, carrying a leather portfolio and a printed deck of slides. He looked like a different person from the bank employee who'd quit impulsively the week before. Before we start, I said, I want to establish some ground rules. This is a business meeting, not a family conversation. I'm going to evaluate your proposal the same way I'd evaluate any potential partnership, and I'm going to ask hard questions that might be uncomfortable to answer. Jake nodded. I understand. I want you to be tough on this. If the idea can't stand up to scrutiny, I need to know that now. For the next hour, Jake walked through his business plan with the kind of detail and preparation that impressed me. Despite my determination to remain objective, he'd identified a specific target market: professionals aged 25 to 35 with household incomes between $40,000 and $80,000. He'd researched their financial challenges, analyzed how existing services failed to meet their needs, and developed a pricing structure that would be accessible without undervaluing his expertise. His marketing strategy was where he needed the most help, but he'd done enough research to understand the basics. He knew he needed to build credibility through content marketing, establish trust through client testimonials, and differentiate himself from larger firms through personal attention and specialized focus. "What's your biggest concern about this business?" I asked when he finished his presentation. "Client acquisition," he said immediately. "I can learn the technical skills and get the necessary certifications, but I don't know how to convince people to trust me with their financial planning when I don't have years of experience to point to." It was an honest answer and a legitimate concern. Trust was essential in financial services, and building it as a new practitioner would require a sophisticated marketing approach. "What makes you think you can compete with established financial planners who've been doing this for decades?" "Because I understand my target market in a way that older advisors don't. I know what it's like to graduate with student loans, to struggle with credit card debt, to feel overwhelmed by financial decisions that no one ever taught you how to make. I can relate to my potential clients because I've been exactly where they are." We spent another 30 minutes going through financial projections, discussing potential challenges, and exploring different partnership structures. By the end of the meeting, I had to admit that Jake had done his homework. His business plan wasn't perfect, but it was solid enough to indicate that he was serious about making this work. "I need a few days to think about this," I told him. "If I decide to move forward, it won't be as a favor to my brother. It will be because I believe this is a good business opportunity for both of us." "That's all I can ask for," Jake said. "Whatever you decide, thank you for taking me seriously." After he left, I spent the weekend reviewing his proposal and discussing it with Marcus. We analyzed the market opportunity, researched the competition, and tried to identify potential risks and rewards of partnering with Jake's venture. "The business idea is sound," Marcus concluded. "The question is whether Jake has what it takes to execute it successfully." A Monday morning, I called Jake and asked him to come back to the office. When he arrived, I had a contract ready for him to review. "I'm willing to partner with you," I said, "but with specific conditions. We'll provide marketing strategy, brand development, and digital marketing services for your financial planning business. In exchange, you'll pay us 15% of your gross revenue for the first 2 years. It was a lower percentage than we typically charged for ongoing marketing services, but it was tied to his success rather than requiring upfront payment he couldn't afford. Additionally, I continued, you'll provide financial planning services to our employees at a 50% discount, and you'll serve as our business financial advisor on strategic decisions. This partnership only works if it benefits both our companies." Jake reviewed the contract carefully, asking thoughtful questions about the terms and timeline. When he signed it 20 minutes later, he looked like someone who'd just taken the biggest risk of his life. "Congratulations," I said, shaking his hand formally. "You're now officially in business." The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Jake threw himself into studying for his financial planning certification with the same intensity he'd once applied to college coursework. Meanwhile, our team developed his brand identity, built his website, and created a content marketing strategy that positioned him as the financial advisor for young professionals. We launched his business with a blog series called Money Mistakes I Made So You Don't Have To, where Jake shared his own financial learning experiences with vulnerability and humor. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Young professionals throughout Austin responded to his authentic approach and practical advice. Within 6 months, Jake had passed his certification exams and signed his first 20 clients. Within a year, he was booked solid and considering hiring an assistant. The revenue share from his business had become a significant income stream for our agency, and his financial advice had helped us make better strategic decisions about growth and investment. But the most satisfying part wasn't the financial success. It was watching Jake transform from someone who'd mocked my ambitions into someone who understood the courage it took to bet on yourself. Our working relationship had rebuilt our personal relationship in a way that felt stronger and more respectful than anything we'd had before. The transformation in our family dynamics was equally remarkable. Sunday dinners became business strategy, sessions where we shared challenges and celebrated successes. Mom started referring to herself as the mother of two entrepreneurs. Dad began asking detailed questions about digital marketing and customer acquisition. Even David, who'd initially been skeptical of both our ventures, started consulting us about marketing strategies for his own startup. Sarah's real estate business had flourished under our marketing guidance. Her social media following had grown from 300 to over 5,000 engaged followers, and she was getting referrals from people who'd never met her in person, but felt connected to her online presence. She doubled her annual sales and was considering expanding into commercial real estate. The success stories were gratifying, but they also created new challenges. As our family members became more successful in their own ventures, they began recommending our services to their networks. We started getting referrals from Sarah's real estate clients, Jake's financial planning clients, and David's startup connections. On one hand, it was the best kind of marketing, word-of-mouth recommendations from satisfied clients who happened to be our relatives. On the other hand, it meant that our personal and professional lives were becoming increasingly intertwined in ways that required careful boundary management. The real test came when David's startup reached a critical growth phase and needed significant marketing support. Unlike Sarah and Jake, who'd approached us with humility and realistic expectations, David came to our agency with the assumption that family connections meant priority treatment and favorable pricing. "I need a complete rebranding campaign and a product launch strategy," he told me during a meeting at our office. "Our investors are expecting us to triple our user base in the next 6 months, and we need marketing that can deliver those results." His tone was confident to the point of being demanding, and he seemed to expect that our family relationship would translate into immediate availability and reduced rates. "What's your marketing budget?" I asked, pulling out our standard questionnaire for new clients. "Budget?" David looked surprised. "I figured we could work out some kind of family arrangement, maybe equity in the company instead of cash payment." It was exactly the kind of expectation that Marcus had warned me about when I started working with family members. David assumed that being my brother-in-law meant he could negotiate terms that we wouldn't offer to other clients. "David," I said carefully, "we appreciate the opportunity to work with your company, but we treat all potential clients the same way. We need to understand your budget, timeline, and specific objectives before we can determine if we're a good fit for each other." The conversation that followed was tense and awkward. David clearly expected special treatment based on our family relationship, while I was determined to maintain the professional standards that had built our agency's reputation. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that his expectations and our capabilities weren't aligned. "I'll need to think about this," David said, gathering his materials with obvious frustration. "I thought family was supposed to help family." After he left, I sat in my office reflecting on how much had changed since that humiliating Sunday dinner 10 months earlier. Then, my family had laughed at my professional ambitions. Now, they were lining up for my professional services. The reversal was complete, but it came with complications I hadn't anticipated. The phone call from my mother came that evening while I was working late in the office. Her voice was concerned in the way it gets when family dynamics become strained. "Mia, honey, David mentioned that his meeting with you didn't go well today. Is there anything I can do to help work things out?" It was the conversation I'd been dreading, the moment when business decisions would be interpreted as family conflicts. I explained the situation as objectively as I could, emphasizing that our standards applied to all potential clients regardless of their relationship to us. "I understand that you need to run your business professionally," Mom said, "but David is family. Couldn't you make an exception just this once?" The request felt like a test of everything I'd built over the past year. Would I compromise my professional standards to avoid family drama? Would I let personal relationships override business judgment the way my family had let personal assumptions override professional respect 10 months earlier? "Mom," I said, "David's company needs more marketing support than his budget can afford. Taking on his project at a reduced rate would mean providing substandard service or losing money on the engagement. Neither option would help him succeed or help our business grow. But he's counting on you, Mia, and Sarah and Jake have both done so well working with you. Sarah and Jake came to us with realistic budgets and clear expectations. They understood that professional services cost money and that family relationships don't change business realities. David is expecting something different, and I can't provide it without compromising our standards. The conversation ended without resolution, but I knew that my decision about David's project would set a precedent for how our family viewed my business going forward. Would they see it as a professional agency that happened to be run by their relative, or as a family resource that should be available at family rates? 2 days later, Sarah called me with a different perspective on the situation. She'd heard about David's meeting from our mother and wanted to share her thoughts. "I think you're absolutely right to stick to your standards," she said. "When I hired you, it was because I needed professional marketing help, and you were the best person I could find to provide it. The fact that you're my sister was nice, but it wasn't why I chose your agency." David seems to see it differently. David has always expected things to come easily to him. When he was in college, he assumed his good grades would automatically lead to a great job. When he started his company, he assumed his technical skills would automatically lead to business success. Now he's assuming that being married to your sister should automatically lead to preferential treatment. Sarah's assessment was harsh, but accurate. David had always been someone who expected rewards without fully understanding the effort required to earn them. "The thing is," Sarah continued, "your business success is too important to risk for anyone's ego. You've built something remarkable, and protecting it is more important than protecting David's feelings." Her support meant more than I could express. 10 months earlier, Sarah had been laughing at my professional prospects. Now she was defending my business decisions against family pressure. The transformation in our relationship had been as significant as the growth in my business. The resolution came the following week when David contacted me again, this time with a different approach. "I've been thinking about our meeting," he said, "and I realize I came in with unrealistic expectations. Could we start over and discuss this as a professional engagement?" "Of course," I said. "Let's schedule another meeting and approach this like any other potential client relationship." The second meeting was completely different from the first. David came prepared with a realistic budget, clear objectives, and an understanding that our family relationship wouldn't change our business practices. We ended up working together on a scaled-down marketing campaign that fit his budget and delivered measurable results for his startup. More importantly, the experience established clear boundaries between our personal and professional relationships. David learned to respect my business standards, and I learned to separate family dynamics from client management. By the end of my first year as an entrepreneur, I had 8 employees, 23 active clients, and revenue that exceeded my wildest projections from when I'd been fired from Henderson Associates. But the most significant change wasn't financial. It was the transformation in how my family viewed me and how I viewed myself. The laughter from that Sunday dinner had been replaced by respect, consultation, and partnership. My relatives, who'd once suggested I consider retail work, were now seeking my professional advice and paying market rates for my services. The family that had mocked my ambitions was now celebrating my achievements and learning from my success. But perhaps most importantly, I'd learned that the most powerful response to being underestimated isn't revenge or resentment. It's building. Something so undeniably successful that the people who doubted you have no choice but to acknowledge your abilities. It's turning mockery into mentorship, laughter into learning, and family dysfunction into functional partnership. The phone rang in my office on a Wednesday afternoon in late autumn, and when I saw the name on the caller ID, I smiled before answering. It was Tom Richardson, my former boss at Henderson Associates, the man who'd fired me 13 months earlier to make room for nepotism and budget cuts. Mia, he said, his voice carrying a humility I'd never heard before. I was wondering if you might have time to discuss a potential consulting opportunity. Tom Richardson's voice came through the phone with a careful politeness that immediately told me everything I needed to know about Henderson Associates' current situation. The confident, dismissive tone he'd used when firing me had been replaced by something that sounded dangerously close to desperation. I was wondering if you might have time to discuss a potential consulting opportunity, he continued, as if we were old colleagues catching up rather than former employer and terminated employee. I leaned back in my office chair, looking out at the Austin skyline that had become my daily view of success. 13 months ago, Tom had handed me a manila envelope with 2 weeks' severance and told me the company was restructuring. Now he was calling me for help, and the irony was so thick I could practically taste it. What kind of consulting opportunity? I asked, keeping my voice professionally neutral, despite the satisfaction coursing through my veins. Well, Tom cleared his throat. We're facing some challenges with client retention and digital marketing performance. Several of our long-term accounts have expressed concerns about our current strategies, and we're looking for someone with expertise in social media marketing and customer engagement. Someone with expertise. The same expertise he'd dismissed when he'd decided to consolidate my position with general marketing and keep Jennifer's nephew instead. I pulled up Henderson's website on my computer while he talked, noting immediately that their online presence looked dated and their social media accounts hadn't been updated in weeks. I see, I said. What happened to Kevin? I thought he was handling social media now. There was a pause that spoke volumes. Kevin is learning, but we need someone with more advanced experience to help us with strategy development and campaign optimization. Learning. Kevin, the nephew who'd been given my job because of his connections rather than his qualifications, was apparently not meeting expectations. The same Kevin whose lack of experience Marcus had warned would become obvious once he was actually responsible for delivering results. Tom, I said, I appreciate you thinking of me, but I should mention that our agency is currently booking new clients about 6 weeks out. We've grown significantly since I left Henderson, and our schedule reflects that demand. Oh, he said, and I could hear surprise in his voice. I didn't realize you were that busy. Jennifer mentioned you were doing some freelance work, but he thought I was struggling to find clients, probably working from my kitchen table and grateful for any opportunity that came my way. The assumption was exactly what I'd expected from someone who'd never understood that firing me was a strategic mistake rather than a cost-saving measure. We have 12 employees now, I said matter-of-factly. Mia Chen Marketing Solutions has become one of the faster-growing digital marketing agencies in Austin. Our clients include tech startups, established businesses, and professional service providers throughout Central Texas. The silence on Tom's end stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice had shifted to something that sounded almost incredulous. 12 employees? Mia, that's incredible. I had no idea. You'd built something so substantial. Of course he had no idea. Tom was the kind of manager who never followed up with former employees unless he needed something from them. He'd probably assumed I was still looking for another corporate job, maybe working at a competitor for less money than Henderson had paid me. What specific challenges is Henderson facing? I asked, deciding to approach this as I would any other potential client consultation. Tom launched into a detailed explanation of the company's current problems, and it became clear that my departure had created more disruption than anyone had anticipated. 3 major clients had terminated their contracts within 6 months of my leaving, citing dissatisfaction with the quality of their social media campaigns. 2 others had reduced their monthly retainers, and several prospects had chosen competitors after seeing Henderson's own social media presence. The Rodriguez account was particularly frustrating, Tom said. They'd been with us for 3 years, but they said our new approach wasn't delivering the results they'd gotten used to. Rodriguez Manufacturing, the account where I'd exceeded performance targets by 30%. The client who'd been so satisfied with my work that they'd immediately hired me when I started my own agency. They were now one of our longest-standing clients and had referred 4 additional businesses to us. And Johnson Tech Solutions, Tom continued. They actually asked specifically about you during our contract renewal meeting. When we told them you were no longer with the company, they decided to explore other options. Johnson Tech was another client I'd managed successfully at Henderson and had brought with me to my own agency. They'd been so impressed with the transition that they'd doubled their marketing budget and expanded into new service areas with our support. It sounds like you're dealing with some significant client retention issues, I said. What's your current approach to addressing these challenges? Well, we've tried to implement some of the strategies you used to use, but the results haven't been consistent. Kevin has been working hard, but he's still developing his skills. We've also looked into hiring another social media specialist, but the candidates we've interviewed either lack experience or want more than we budgeted for the position. The picture Tom was painting was exactly what I'd expected would happen when Henderson prioritized politics over performance. They'd created a gap in expertise that was costing them clients and revenue, and now they were scrambling to find solutions that didn't require admitting they'd made a fundamental error in judgment. Tom, I said, before we discuss any potential consulting arrangement, I need to be transparent about something. Rodriguez Manufacturing and Johnson Tech Solutions are both clients of my agency now. In fact, several of the accounts you've lost have come to us specifically because they were dissatisfied with the transition after I left. Another long silence. When Tom spoke again, his voice was tight with what sounded like frustration and embarrassment. I see. That explains some of the challenges we've been facing. I mention this not to be difficult, but because any consulting work I do for Henderson would need to avoid conflicts of interest with my existing clients. It also means that part of your client retention problem is directly related to my departure, which affects how I'd approach helping you solve it. What I didn't say was that part of me was enjoying watching Henderson struggle with the consequences of their decision. It wasn't that I took pleasure in other people's professional difficulties, but there was undeniable satisfaction in seeing a company that had undervalued my contributions now dealing with the results of that choice. Mia, Tom said, I want to be honest with you. When we made the decision to restructure your position, it was based on budget considerations and operational efficiency. We didn't anticipate the impact it would have on client relationships. Budget considerations and operational efficiency, the same corporate euphemisms he'd used when firing me, as if losing experienced employees was simply a matter of spreadsheet optimization rather than strategic planning. I understand, I said. Business decisions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are more significant than anticipated. Would you be willing to meet and discuss how we might work together to address some of these challenges? I know this is an unusual situation, but we're committed to finding solutions that work for everyone involved. The request put me in an interesting position. From a business perspective, consulting for Henderson could be lucrative and would demonstrate the value of my expertise to my former employer. From a personal perspective, it felt like vindication of everything I'd built since being fired. But I also had responsibilities to my current clients and employees. Taking on Henderson as a consulting client would require careful management to avoid conflicts of interest, and it would need to be structured in a way that didn't compromise my agency's reputation or client relationships. I'm willing to have a preliminary conversation, I said. But I want to be clear that any consulting arrangement would be at our standard rates and would need to comply with our existing client confidentiality agreements. Of course. What are your standard consulting rates? I quoted him our daily consulting fee, which was significantly higher than what Henderson had paid me annually when I was an employee. The number represented not just my increased expertise and proven track record, but also the value of having access to the insights and strategies that had made my agency successful. Tom's sharp intake of breath told me the number was higher than he'd expected, but he didn't immediately object. "That's substantial," he said. "But given the challenges we're facing, it might be justified if you can help us develop strategies that stop the client losses and improve our market position." We scheduled a meeting for the following week, and after hanging up the phone, I sat in my office for several minutes processing what had just happened. Tom Richardson, the man who'd fired me to make room for his HR director's nephew, was now asking to pay me more in a single day of consulting than Henderson had paid me in a month as an employee. The reversal was so complete it felt almost surreal. 13 months ago, I'd been told my position was being eliminated for budget reasons. Now the same company was willing to pay premium consulting rates for the expertise they'd dismissed as unnecessary. I called Marcus into my office to discuss the situation. As my business partner and someone who'd witnessed Henderson's dysfunction firsthand, his perspective would be valuable in deciding how to approach this opportunity. "Tom Richardson called," I said, when Marcus settled into the chair across from my desk. "Henderson wants to hire us as consultants." Marcus's eyebrows shot up. "Henderson? The company that fired you to save money on social media marketing?" "The same one. Apparently they're having client retention problems and need help with digital marketing strategy." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Let me guess. Kevin isn't working out as well as they'd hoped." I filled Marcus in on the details of my conversation with Tom, including the client losses, budget constraints, and apparent recognition that they'd underestimated the impact of my departure. "This is perfect," Marcus said when I finished. "Not only do we get to charge them premium rates for the expertise they threw away, but we get to demonstrate exactly what they lost when they chose nepotism over competence." "I'm concerned about potential conflicts of interest," I said. "We represent several of their former clients, and anything we recommend to Henderson could indirectly affect our existing relationships." "That's a legitimate concern," Marcus agreed. "But it's also manageable. We could structure the consulting engagement to focus on areas that don't overlap with our current clients, or we could develop strategies that improve Henderson's overall approach without compromising specific account relationships." We spent the next hour discussing different approaches to the Henderson consulting opportunity. The more we talked, the clearer it became that this could be an ideal way to demonstrate our agency's capabilities while generating significant revenue from a client who truly understood the value of our expertise. "There's also a psychological benefit," Marcus pointed out. "Working with Henderson as a consultant rather than an employee changes the power dynamic completely. You're not asking for their approval or trying to justify your decisions. You're the expert they're paying for." The distinction was important. When I'd worked at Henderson, my suggestions had been filtered through corporate hierarchy and office politics. As a consultant, my recommendations would carry the weight of external expertise and proven success. The meeting with Tom was scheduled for the following Thursday in Henderson's conference room, the same space where I'd attended countless strategy sessions as an employee. Walking back into that building felt like stepping into a parallel universe where everything looked familiar. But the context had changed completely. The receptionist, a young woman named Ashley who'd started at Henderson shortly before I was fired, looked surprised when I walked in wearing a tailored suit and carrying the leather portfolio I used for client meetings. "Mia?" she said clearly, uncertain about how to address me. "I didn't know you were coming in today." "I have a meeting with Tom," I said. "Consulting appointment." The word consulting seemed to confuse her even more. As far as Ashley knew, I was the former employee, who'd been let go for budget reasons. The idea that I was now being brought back as a paid consultant probably didn't fit her understanding of how these things typically worked. Tom appeared in the lobby a few minutes later, looking nervous in a way I'd never seen during my time as his employee. He was dressed more formally than usual, and his handshake lingered slightly longer than necessary, as if he was trying to establish rapport with someone whose cooperation he needed. "Mia, thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate you taking the time to discuss this with us." The politeness was almost comical coming from someone who'd once dismissed my suggestions in team meetings and had ultimate fired me without considering the potential consequences. But I matched his professional tone and followed him to the conference room where we'd be meeting. Jennifer Hartley was already seated at the conference table, along with Kevin Morrison, the nephew whose hiring had contributed to my termination. Jennifer looked uncomfortable, probably because she knew her family connection to Kevin had created the situation they were now trying to solve. Kevin looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "You remember Jennifer from HR?" Tom said as we sat down. "And this is Kevin Morrison, our current social media marketing specialist." Kevin was younger than I'd expected, probably fresh out of college with limited work experience beyond internships and part-time jobs. He had the eager but overwhelmed look of someone who'd been given responsibilities he wasn't quite ready to handle. "Nice to meet you, Kevin," I said, shaking his hand. "Tom mentioned you've been working on social media strategy. How long have you been with Henderson?" "About 8 months, Kevin said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I started right after. Well, right after the restructuring. Right after I was fired, he meant." Kevin had been handed my job and my clients without the experience or expertise to maintain the relationships I'd built. Looking at him, I felt a mixture of sympathy and frustration. He was clearly in over his head, but he was also the beneficiary of nepotism that had cost me my job and Henderson several important clients. Tom opened the meeting by outlining Henderson's current challenges in more detail than he'd provided over the phone. The client retention problems were worse than he'd initially indicated, with total revenue down nearly 20% from the previous year. Their digital marketing metrics had declined across all major categories, and their new business development had stalled as prospects chose competitors with stronger online presences. "We're hoping you can help us develop strategies to address these issues," Tom said. "Your expertise in social media marketing and client engagement could be exactly what we need to turn things around." It was the same expertise he'd eliminated from his payroll 13 months earlier, but I didn't point out the irony. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and began taking notes as if this were any other client consultation. "Before we discuss solutions," I said, "I need to understand your current processes and performance metrics. Kevin, can you walk me through your typical approach to social media campaign development?" For the next 30 minutes, Kevin described Henderson's current social media strategy with painful honesty. It quickly became clear that he'd been trying to replicate my previous approaches without understanding the strategic thinking behind them. He was posting content regularly but without clear objectives, engaging with followers but without conversion goals, and tracking metrics but without meaningful analysis. "What's your average engagement rate across platforms?" I asked. Kevin looked at Jennifer, who looked at Tom, who cleared his throat uncomfortably. "We're not entirely sure," Tom said. "Kevin has been tracking likes and followers, but we haven't been measuring engagement rates specifically." Not measuring engagement rates. It was like a restaurant not tracking how many customers returned, or a retail store not monitoring which products generated the most profit. Engagement rates were fundamental metrics for any serious social media marketing effort. "What about conversion tracking?" I continued. "How do you measure the business impact of your social media activities?" Another round of uncertain glances. It became clear that Henderson had been treating social media as a necessary expense rather than a strategic investment, posting content, without clear objectives and measuring success through vanity metrics that didn't correlate with business results. "I think I understand the scope of the challenges you're facing," I said, after gathering enough information to develop preliminary recommendations. Your current approach is missing several key elements that are essential for effective digital marketing. I spent the next 20 minutes outlining the fundamental problems with Henderson's current strategy, from lack of clear objectives to inadequate measurement systems. I explained how effective social media marketing required integrated planning, consistent messaging, audience segmentation, and continuous optimization based on performance data. Tom and Jennifer took notes furiously, occasionally asking questions that revealed how much they didn't understand about digital marketing best practices. Kevin listened with the expression of someone who was learning that everything he'd been doing was fundamentally flawed. "What would it look like to fix these problems?" Tom asked when I finished my assessment. I opened my portfolio and pulled out a preliminary proposal I'd prepared before the meeting. Addressing these challenges would require a comprehensive strategy overhaul, including objective setting, audience analysis, content strategy development, implementation planning, and performance measurement systems. The proposal outlined a 6-month consulting engagement that would rebuild Henderson's digital marketing approach from the ground up. It included training for their internal team, development of new processes and systems, and ongoing optimization based on performance data. The investment would be significant, I continued, but the alternative is continuing to lose clients and market share to competitors who understand how to leverage digital marketing effectively. Tom reviewed the proposal carefully, and I could see him calculating the cost against the revenue they'd lost from client departures. The consulting fees were substantial, but they were a fraction of what Henderson had lost in annual client revenue. "This is exactly what we need," Tom said finally. "When could you start?" "Our next availability for a project of this scope would be in about 6 weeks, I said. "We'd need signed contracts and initial payment to reserve that time." 6 weeks was actually longer than necessary, but I wanted Henderson to understand that they were now competing for my time and attention rather than employing me at their convenience. Jennifer spoke up for the first time during the meeting. "Mia, I want to apologize for how your departure was handled. We made some decisions based on budget pressures that we didn't fully think through." It was the closest thing to an admission of error I was likely to get from Henderson's leadership. Jennifer was acknowledging that firing me had been a mistake, though she was framing it as a budget decision, rather than the nepotism that had actually driven the choice. "I appreciate that, Jennifer," I said. "Business decisions always involve trade-offs. The important thing now is moving forward with strategies that will help Henderson regain its competitive position." The meeting concluded with Tom agreeing to review the proposal with Henderson's partners and get back to me within a week. As I packed up my materials, Kevin approached me hesitantly. "Mia," he said, "I just want you to know that I never wanted to take your job. I knew I wasn't qualified for it, but Jennifer said it would be a good learning opportunity." I looked at Kevin, seeing past the nepotism to the young professional who'd been put in an impossible situation. He'd been set up to fail by people who cared more about family connections than business success. "Kevin," I said, "you're not responsible for the decisions other people made. But if you want to succeed in marketing, you need to focus on developing real expertise rather than relying on relationships. Take every opportunity to learn, ask questions when you don't understand something, and never stop trying to improve your skills." As I left Henderson's office building and walked to my car, I reflected on how different the experience had been from what I'd expected. I'd anticipated feeling triumphant or vindicated, but instead I mostly felt professionally satisfied. Henderson needed help. I had the expertise to provide it, and we'd structured a business relationship that would benefit both parties. The real vindication wasn't in Henderson's struggles or in their recognition of my value. It was in the fact that I'd built something successful enough that my former employer was now willing to pay premium rates for my guidance. Tom called 3 days later to accept the proposal and schedule our first strategy session. Henderson Associates, the company that had fired me to save money, was now investing more in 6 months of my consulting services than they'd paid me in an entire year as an employee. But the most satisfying part wasn't the money or the recognition. It was the knowledge that I'd proven something important to myself and to everyone who doubted my abilities. Success wasn't about getting revenge on the people who'd underestimated me. It was about building something so undeniably valuable that even the people who'd dismissed me had no choice but to acknowledge it. The Henderson Consulting Project officially began 6 weeks later, and it turned out to be one of the most rewarding professional experiences I'd had since starting my agency. Working with Tom, Jennifer, and Kevin to rebuild their digital marketing capabilities gave me a chance to demonstrate the full scope of my expertise while helping them understand the strategic thinking behind effective marketing. Kevin, in particular, was an eager student who absorbed everything I taught him about audience analysis, content strategy, and performance measurement. He'd been trying to do the right things without understanding the underlying principles, and once he grasped the strategic framework, his work improved dramatically. Within 3 months, Henderson's social media engagement rates had doubled, their lead generation had increased by 40%, and they'd successfully retained 2 major clients who'd been considering leaving. The transformation was dramatic, enough that Tom asked if we'd be interested in a longer-term consulting relationship. But perhaps the most significant outcome of the Henderson project was the recognition it brought to our agency. Word spread quickly through Austin's business community that we'd successfully turned around the digital marketing for an established firm, and our phones started ringing with inquiries from other companies facing similar challenges. The irony was perfect. Henderson, the company that had fired me to save money on marketing, had become one of our best sources of new business referrals. Their success story demonstrated our capabilities better than any case study we could have created. 6 months after starting the Henderson Consulting Project, I received an email that made me laugh out loud. It was from a business magazine asking if I'd be interested in writing an article about building a successful agency after being fired from a corporate job. "We're particularly interested in your perspective on how setbacks can become opportunities," the editor wrote, "and how professionals can leverage expertise gained in traditional employment to build successful independent ventures." I agreed to write the article, and it was published 2 months later with the headline, "From Fired to Founder: How One Marketing Professional Turned Termination into Triumph." The article generated more media attention than I'd expected, including interviews with local business publications and an invitation to speak at a conference about women in entrepreneurship. The speaking engagement was scheduled for a Saturday morning in downtown Austin, and I'd invited my family to attend. As I stood on the stage looking out at an audience of business professionals and entrepreneurs, I spotted my parents, Sarah, Jake, and even David sitting in the 3rd row. 18 months ago, I began my presentation. I was fired from my marketing job at a local firm. My family suggested I might want to consider retail work as a more realistic career option. The laughter from the audience was warm and understanding, the kind that comes from people who've faced their own professional setbacks and understand the challenge of starting over. Today, that same firm is one of our agency's consulting clients, paying premium rates for the expertise they once eliminated from their payroll. My brother has built a successful financial planning practice using marketing strategies we developed together. My sister has doubled her real estate sales using our social media marketing approach. And my family has learned something important about the difference between supporting someone and underestimating them. As I looked out at the audience, I saw my parents beaming with pride, Sarah taking notes like she was planning to implement every strategy I mentioned, and Jake recording parts of my presentation on his phone, not to mock me, but to share my success with his own network. The transformation was complete. The laughter that had once echoed through my parents' dining room as mockery had been replaced by applause that echoed through a conference hall as celebration. The family that had suggested I consider folding shirts for a living was now sitting in the front row watching me speak to other business professionals about building successful companies. But the most important transformation hadn't happened in my family's perception of me. It had happened in my own understanding of what success really meant. Success wasn't about proving other people wrong or getting revenge on those who doubted me. Success was about building something valuable, creating opportunities for others, and having the courage to bet on yourself even when the people closest to you weren't willing to make that same bet. After my presentation, as I talked with attendees and answered questions about agency development and client acquisition, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Saw the article about your agency in Austin Business Journal. We're looking for marketing help and would love to discuss working with you. Can we schedule a consultation? It was the 15th similar message I'd received since the article was published. What had started as a response to being fired had become a thriving business that was generating more opportunities than I could handle. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the strange journey that had brought me to this point. 18 months ago, I'd been sitting on the floor of my empty apartment, laughing to keep from crying, wondering how I was going to rebuild my career after being fired. Now I was driving home from a speaking engagement where I'd shared my story with hundreds of other entrepreneurs, my phone full of messages from potential clients, my family finally understanding what I'd accomplished, and my former employer paying me premium rates for the expertise they'd once dismissed. The laughter from that Sunday dinner had stopped echoing in my head months ago, replaced by the sound of success being built one satisfied client at a time. But more than that, it had been replaced by the knowledge that sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated isn't anger or resentment. Sometimes it's simply proving them wrong through the undeniable evidence of your own success. 2 years after that humiliating Sunday dinner, I stood in the ballroom of the Austin Convention Center accepting the Small Business Administration's Entrepreneur of the Year award. The crystal trophy felt surprisingly heavy in my hands as I looked out at an audience of 500 business leaders, community officials, and fellow entrepreneurs who were giving me a standing ovation. My agency had grown to 15 employees and was generating annual revenue that exceeded what most small businesses achieved in their first decade. We'd been featured in 3 national publications, had consulted for companies across Texas and beyond, and had developed case studies that were being taught in business schools. The transformation from fired marketing coordinator to award-winning agency founder had been complete and undeniable. But as I stood on that stage, I wasn't thinking about revenue numbers or industry recognition. I was thinking about the phone call I'd received that morning from my mother, her voice trembling with emotion as she told me how proud she was of everything I'd accomplished. "I keep thinking about that awful dinner," she'd said. "How we laughed at you when you needed our support most. I'm so ashamed of how we acted, and so amazed by what you've built despite us." The shame in her voice had been genuine, but I'd stopped needing their validation long ago. The success I'd built wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could create something meaningful, valuable, and lasting. After the award ceremony, there was a reception where I found myself surrounded by other business owners, local politicians, and potential clients who wanted to discuss marketing strategies for their companies. It was exactly the kind of professional, networking event that 18 months earlier I couldn't have imagined attending as an honored guest. Sarah appeared at my elbow during a brief lull in conversations, carrying 2 glasses of champagne and wearing the kind of proud smile that had been notably absent during our family dinners. "I've been watching you work this room," she said, handing me a glass. "You're completely in your element here. It's incredible to see." "It feels natural now," I said. "When you spend every day solving marketing challenges for different types of businesses, talking about strategy becomes second nature." Sarah's real estate business had flourished under our marketing guidance, but more importantly, our working relationship had rebuilt our personal relationship in ways I hadn't expected. She'd become one of my most reliable sources of referrals, and her understanding of what I did professionally had deepened her respect for who I was personally. "Can I tell you something?" she said, lowering her voice. "That night when we all laughed at you, I went home and felt terrible about it immediately, but I was too proud to call and apologize. I kept telling myself you were being unrealistic, that freelancing was too risky, that we were just being practical. What changed your mind? Watching you succeed despite our lack of support, realizing that while we were focused on why your ideas wouldn't work, you were focused on making them work. It made me understand the difference between people who create opportunities and people who wait for them. Jake joined our conversation, looking polished and confident in a way that would have been unimaginable during his banking days. His financial planning practice had grown to over 200 clients, and he'd recently hired 2 junior advisors to help manage the workload. I was just talking to the mayor about your presentation last month at the Business Development Conference, he said. She's thinking about hiring your agency to help with the city's economic development marketing. The mayor of Austin wanting to hire my agency. 2 years ago, my family had suggested I apply for retail jobs. Now elected officials were considering my expertise valuable enough to warrant taxpayer investment. That would be an interesting project, I said. Economic development marketing has unique challenges, but it's exactly the kind of work we've been wanting to expand into. She mentioned something else, Jake continued. There's talk about creating a small business mentorship program, and your name came up as someone who could help develop the curriculum. Government consulting and mentorship program development. The opportunities were coming faster than I could evaluate them, each one representing recognition that my expertise had value beyond individual client relationships. David approached our small group, and I noticed immediately that he looked different. Gone was the cocky confidence he'd displayed during his first meeting at my agency. He seemed more thoughtful, more humble, and genuinely interested in learning rather than expecting special treatment. Mia, he said, I wanted to thank you again for the work your team did on our product launch. We exceeded our user acquisition targets by 40%, and our investors are extremely happy with the results. David's startup had indeed been successful, but more importantly, our professional relationship had taught him to value expertise over assumptions. He'd learned to respect marketing as a strategic discipline rather than something anyone could figure out intuitively. I also wanted to ask you about something, he continued. We're considering expanding into new markets, and I'd love to discuss a longer-term marketing partnership, not as family, but as a client who's seen what your agency can accomplish. The distinction was important. David had learned that professional relationships needed to be based on mutual benefit rather than family obligation, and that success required investing in expertise rather than expecting special treatment. My parents arrived at the reception, fashionably late, both of them dressed more formally than I'd seen them in years. Dad was wearing the tie I'd given him for his birthday, and Mom had on the dress she usually reserved for weddings and holiday parties. They looked nervous and proud at the same time, like people who weren't entirely sure they belonged at such an event, but were determined to celebrate their daughter's achievement. Sweetheart, Mom said, hugging me tightly, we are so incredibly proud of you. This whole evening has been magical. The presentation you gave was remarkable, Dad added. I had no idea marketing involved so much strategic thinking. You made it sound like you're solving puzzles and telling stories at the same time. Their comments revealed how much their understanding of my work had evolved. 2 years ago, they'd seen marketing as posting pictures on social media. Now they understood it as a complex discipline that required creativity, analytical thinking, and deep understanding of human psychology. I recorded part of your speech, Mom said, pulling out her phone. I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to share it with your Aunt Linda. She's always been so supportive of your career, and I know she'd love to see this. The request to record and share my speech was such a complete reversal from Jake's earlier recording of my humiliation that it made me pause. The same family that had once documented my professional failure for entertainment was now documenting my professional success for celebration. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing outside the convention center with my family. the Austin skyline stretching out before us like a promise of future possibilities. The city that had witnessed my transformation from fired employee to successful entrepreneur now felt like home in a way it never had before. "I have an announcement," I said, looking at each of them in turn. "Next month, I'm opening a second office in Houston. We've had so many clients there that it makes sense to have a permanent presence in the market." The news generated excited congratulations and questions about expansion plans, office locations, and hiring strategies. My family's engagement with my business decisions had evolved from mockery to genuine interest and support. "That's incredible. Mia," Sarah said, "how many employees will you have between both offices?" "We're planning to hire 5 people initially in Houston, which would bring our total to 20 employees. But if the growth continues at its current pace, we could be at 30 people within a year." 30 employees. I tried to imagine explaining to my family 2 years ago that I would someday be responsible for the livelihoods of 30 people, that my business decisions would affect not just my own success, but the careers and families of dozens of other professionals. "What's next after Houston?" Jake asked. "Are you thinking about other cities?" "Dallas is a possibility," I said. "Maybe San Antonio. The demand is definitely there, but I want to make sure we maintain quality as we grow. It's better to expand thoughtfully than to grow too fast and compromise what we've built." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with my family asking thoughtful questions about business strategy, market analysis, and growth planning. Their questions demonstrated genuine understanding of the challenges involved in scaling a service business, and their suggestions showed they'd been paying attention to my success rather than just celebrating it. As we prepared to leave, Mom pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Mia," she said, "I need to tell you something I should have said 2 years ago. When you lost your job at Henderson, we reacted out of fear. We were scared for you, scared about your future, and we expressed that fear as doubt instead of support." "I understand that now," I said. "Fear makes people say things they don't really mean. But that's not an excuse for how we treated you. You needed encouragement and belief, and instead we gave you mockery and dismissal. You succeeded not because of our support, but despite our lack of it. That's something I'll always regret." Her apology was more complete and heartfelt than anything she'd offered before, but it also felt unnecessary. I'd moved past needing their validation or their regret. My success had become its own reward, independent of their initial reactions or current pride. "Mom," I said, "the person I became through this experience is someone I'm proud to be. If everything had been easy, if everyone had believed in me from the beginning, I might not have developed the resilience and determination that made this success possible." "You're saying our doubt helped you succeed?" "I'm saying that learning to believe in myself when others didn't taught me something important about where real confidence comes from. It comes from knowing you can handle whatever challenges arise, not from having other people tell you you're capable." We hugged goodbye, and as I drove home to my downtown apartment, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since that terrible Sunday dinner. The family relationships that had been damaged by assumptions and misunderstandings had been rebuilt through mutual respect and shared success. More importantly, I'd learned that the most powerful response to being underestimated isn't anger or resentment. It's building something so undeniably successful that the people who doubted you have no choice but to acknowledge your abilities. The next morning, I woke up in my apartment overlooking Lady Bird Lake and checked my phone to find 17 new messages from potential clients who'd seen coverage of the awards ceremony. Each message represented another opportunity to grow, the business I'd built from nothing, another chance to solve complex marketing challenges for companies that valued expertise over assumptions. But the message that made me smile wasn't from a potential client. It was from Marcus, who'd sent a photo of our team celebrating at the office after watching the awards ceremony online. 15 brilliant, dedicated professionals who'd chosen to build their careers with my agency, who'd believed in the vision we were creating together. Proud to be part of what you've built, his message read, but more proud to call you a friend and business partner. Can't wait to see what we accomplish next. As I got ready for another day of running the agency that had grown beyond my wildest expectations, I thought about the strange journey that had brought me to this point. From that humiliating dinner to standing on stage accepting an entrepreneur award, from my family's laughter to their pride, from unemployment to employing others. The transformation had been complete, but it hadn't been about revenge or vindication. It had been about discovering what I was capable of when I stopped, waiting for other people's permission to succeed. My phone buzzed with one final message as I prepared to leave for the office. It was from Jennifer Hartley at Henderson Associates, the HR director whose nephew's hiring had contributed to my original termination. Mia, congratulations on your award. Henderson would like to discuss expanding our consulting relationship. We're opening a new division and need comprehensive marketing strategy development. Are you available for a meeting next week? I smiled as I typed my response. Thank you, Jennifer. We're currently booking new clients 8 weeks out, but I'd be happy to schedule a consultation to discuss your needs. 8 weeks out. The same company that had fired me to save money was now willing to wait 2 months for access to my expertise. The reversal was perfect, but it no longer felt like vindication. It just felt like business. As I walked into my office that morning, past the reception area with our awards displayed prominently, past the conference room where we held strategy sessions with Fortune 500 companies, past the workstations where my employees were already collaborating on campaigns that would help their clients succeed, I realized something important. The laughter from that Sunday dinner had stopped echoing in my head entirely. It had been replaced by something much more satisfying. The sound of success being built one satisfied client at a time, one strategic decision at a time. One day of proving that sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated is simply refusing to accept anyone else's limitations on what you can accomplish. My family had learned to see me differently, but more importantly, I'd learned to see myself clearly. Not as someone who needed their approval or validation, but as someone who could create value, solve problems, and build something meaningful regardless of what anyone else believed about my potential. That evening, as I reviewed proposals for 3 new clients and planned the expansion into Houston, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. "Is this Mia Chen from Mia Chen Marketing Solutions?" the caller asked. "Yes, how can I help?" "You?" "My name is Patricia Williams, and I'm calling from Harvard Business School. We're developing a case study about successful agency launches, and your story has been recommended by several industry professionals. Would you be interested in participating?" Harvard Business School wanted to write a case study about my agency. The same business that had started in my apartment after being fired was now being considered worthy of academic analysis at one of the world's most prestigious institutions. "I'd be honored to participate," I said. After hanging up the phone, I sat in my office for a moment, looking out at the Austin skyline that had become the backdrop for my transformation from fired employee to successful entrepreneur. In 2 years, everything had changed. My family's perception of me, my own understanding of what I was capable of, and my definition of what success really meant. But perhaps the most important change was the simplest one. I'd stopped needing anyone else's permission to believe in myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.